Thank you for joining me for another 5 good minutes with the Word. I'm Barry Bryson. We're continuing our study of Old Testament relationships that exemplify the New Testament concept of agape. The love that God has for us, the love that defines God. God is agape. 1 John chapter 4, verse 8. And we've been looking at those places in the Greek translation of the Old Testament that those 72 rabbis made in Alexandria, Egypt in 240, 250 BC. And the judicious way they chose this obscure Greek word to express something timeless and eternal and to give it a meaning that communicates to us to this day. And that was certainly the way the New Testament used the word agape. And we're going to talk about the relationship between David and Jonathan, which is defined in the Septuagint as a relationship of agape. We talked about Ruth, the book of Ruth last time, and about Naomi and Ruth, and about how that book, which is about agape, could easily be about philia because it's about family members doing right by each other and caring about each other and doing right by each other, right by each other. But the philia is the expression of something much deeper, which Naomi communicates or Ruth communicates to Naomi when she says, "Wherever you go, I'll go. Wherever you stay, I'll stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God." That everyone here is selfless. Everyone here loves someone non-transactionally, not expecting any good thing in return. They just love and they serve because they do. And so this is clearly the philia is an expression of agape. We mentioned that one of the Greek words that doesn't appear in the Old Testament and that only appears in a compound word in Romans 12:10 in the New Testament is the word storge, which is a bond between friends that is deeper than a filial bond. Um, and one would think that the bond between David and Jonathan would be called that. They would use the word storge for the relationship between David and Jonathan, but that's not what is used. There is storge there. Clearly, there is storge there. There's this bond that goes beyond, familial responsibilities. Because honestly, Jonathan, the first time he meets David, really, uh, literally strips himself of his familial expectations in order to express his love for David. This storge is really an expression of something much deeper, and that thing that is much deeper is agape love. So David, he's known at the palace first because he's a musician who sings to Saul when he can't sleep because God's taken his spirit away, and then he defeats Goliath, and he becomes the commander in chief of the army as a very young man, not long afterward. And so, when this officially happens, after his defeat of Goliath and he's presented back to the king as the victor, Jonathan is there, Saul's oldest son and heir, and immediately he just loves David. So 1 Samuel 18, verse 1. Now it came about when he finished speaking to Saul, the soul of Jonathan was knit to the soul of David, and Jonathan loved him as himself. And Saul took him that day and did not let him return to his father's house. And Jonathan made a covenant with David because he loved him as himself. And Jonathan stripped himself of the robe that was on him and gave it to David, and his armor, including his sword, and his bow and his belt. And David went out wherever Saul sent him and prospered. Anyway, they immediately love each other, these two men, and they love each other more deeply than any relationship that they have otherwise. Something that David is going to mention now. This is agape. This is not anything untoward. This is not eros. This is agape love. These men have this agape bond with each other that they have with no one else. And to the point that when Jonathan, who's older, he's an older man, he would be maybe even a generation older, or at least 10 or so years, you'd think, older than David at this time. He literally divests himself of his princely accoutrement and puts them on David. He is saying to David something that God has already said to David. You're the future king, not me. I'm handing this over to you because I love you so much. And Jonathan is one of the unsung heroes of the Bible. We don't appreciate him enough. This man loved his friend David and never betrayed that love, but also never betrayed his father Saul, who was trying to kill David all those years. And Jonathan ends up dying side by side with his father in a battle that should have never been fought, all the while maintaining his loving relationship with his friend David. It's an amazing thing that he accomplishes. And he's no less the warrior than David is. We already know this from the victory he won himself over the Philistines before David even comes on the scene. Um, and David loves him too. When they have their moment of parting, because Saul is trying to kill David in chapter 20, um, verses 12 through 17, um, they make their vow again because they love each other and they promise that they'll never do harm to each other or to each other's offspring. And then when they part in chapter 20, verse 41, it says they kissed each other and wept together, but David wept more. And they would only have a few more meetings in their lives before Jonathan died. That verse always gets to me. It just does. That these two men who loved each other and who were so close, closer than brothers, closer than even friends, could not have been a team, could not have been in each other's lives more than they were. And when it says David, who's the younger man, he wept more. We know that everything that Jonathan felt for David, David felt for Jonathan. And when Jonathan and Saul die, and David writes this national hymn in 2 Samuel chapter 1, beginning with verse 17, in which he doesn't say one unkind thing about the man who has just spent a decade trying to kill him, Saul, but says only wonderful things, trying to bring healing to all the nation. Um, he writes this national hymn of appreciation, of mourning, this national dirge for Saul and Jonathan. But then at the end, he can't help himself from being personal. And he says in verse 25, the refrain of the song, How have the mighty fallen in Israel? That's the refrain that's repeated in the song that he writes. How have the mighty fallen in the midst of battle? Jonathan is slain on your high places. I am distressed for you, my brother Jonathan. You have been very precious, pleasant. The word means it means to have the rarest value, like the Hope Diamond. That's what it means. It means it's the most precious thing that you have. And he's saying the most precious thing in my life is my relationship with you. You have been precious to me. Your love to me was more wonderful than the love of women. Now have the mighty fallen and the weapons of war perished. He's not saying that. They were a couple in the way he and Michael, Jonathan's sister, were married and were a married couple. He's not saying that at all. What he is saying, and we know it to be true from Scripture, he had no real agape relationship with a woman in his life. He didn't agape Michael. She agaped him. He didn't agape her. He didn't agape Bathsheba. He had lust for her. He had respect and awe for Abigail, but did he have agape for her? We're not told that. But he had agape for Jonathan. And that's what he means. And that is to his credit and his detriment. He should have loved the wife of his youth. And he didn't. But he is not incapable of loving someone else more than he loves himself. And that person is Jonathan. And now Jonathan is dead. Well, we've seen agape expressed as philia, and we've seen agape expressed as storge. Next time we're together, we're going to talk about agape expressed as eros, at least the way we define that word. Thank you so much for another 5 good minutes, which is now another 10 good minutes with the word.